Dark allies. Goth ripped another hunk from his squirrel and chewed thoughtfully. He looked up at the sky. This was the second night he'd spent with Shade and Marina, and he was beginning to recognize a few of these stars now. It wouldn't be long before he could navigate by himself, and then he could make a quick meal of these two little bats. Still, they were useful in other ways. He didn't understand the trees here, some with spindly leafless branches, others with sharp, prickly needles. It was Marina who'd found a place for them to roost last night, in a deserted woodpecker's hole. And Shade had shown him how to drink from the stream, by breaking through the frozen water. He called it ice. Ice. Never had he seen such a horrific thing. It was painful to touch, the cold seeping into him with a shock. He ruffled his wings and closed them tighter around his body, but the wind cut through anyway. The sooner he was free of this northern wasteland, the better. Throbb landed beside him with a sparrow in his jaws. "I want bat," he whined. "Not yet," Goth growled. "Wait, you'll get bat soon enough. Have some self-discipline, and remember," he added ominously, looking Throbb right in the eye, "I like bat too." Throbb shuffled back a few inches and ate his sparrow sullenly. "Who's this nocturna I keep talking about?" Goth used a claw to pick out some meat between his teeth. "Some pathetic little religion, I suppose." Shade had told him about it. The battle between birds and beasts, the banishment, and his wonderful promise. It was all ridiculous, but he said nothing, preferring to keep Zod's, the one true bad god, secret for the time being. "Even if Nocturna does exist," he said derisively, "she can't be very powerful. Just look at the puny creatures she rules over." Throbb hacked out a laugh, spitting up some gristle and bones at the same time. They really were pitiful creatures, Goth thought. They couldn't even defend themselves against pigeons. The owls, he'd admit, were somewhat more formidable. Fighting more than two at a time would be a challenge. Still, these bats lived in total fear of them, afraid to show their faces during the day, and now even at night, according to Shade. Goth smiled, pleased. It seemed he'd started a war. And they needed him, these two bats. Shade wanted him to meet the leaders of his colony. Of course, Goth had willingly agreed, knowing he'd be long gone by then. Once he could fly south alone, he certainly wouldn't need the help of some mangy Silverwing elder. Unless... The thought slid into his head like a snake's tongue. Unless Zots meant for him to meet the Silverwing colony. Unless there was a design behind his capture by humans in the jungle. It made sense. Why would Zots have let the humans bring him north, if not for a purpose? The dream. Hundreds upon hundreds of Silverwings flying around him in the jungle. And how did they get there? They got there, a voice inside his head told him. Because you brought them free. "In the jungle," Goth was saying, "it's never cold. The heat hangs in the air like rain. The landscape is lush, not like this rocky forest below us, but bright with flowers and plants and fruits, the likes of which you've never seen. And the insects there are so succulent. 3 or 4 would be enough to feed you for an entire night." Shade listened, rapt, as they flew through the cold sky. It was not the beetles Goth described, but the warmth that made his mouth water. Waking this evening, he had been startled to find a faint dusting of frost on his outer wingtips, and he'd beaten it off anxiously. This was the 3rd night they'd spent with Goth and Throbb, and they were still navigating by the cathedral star. He wondered how long it would be before they caught up with the other Silverwings. The whole world was glazed with frost, the naked tree branches glinting silver. The sound of insects had dulled over the past nights, and hunting was becoming more difficult. Few living things came out at night now. From time to time he'd spotted huge flocks of birds in the distance, making their own migration south. So far, though, there'd been no sign of any other bat colonies, and this worried him. "There's a sheltered ledge over there," Marina said, pointing to a rocky hillside. "We should probably find a roost, and then we have about an hour to feed." Shade shivered and looked to the east. He hated stopping, always felt like he was losing time. But at least the sun meant it would be a little warmer soon. His ears ached, and his feet felt numb. "How many bats are there in your colony?" he asked Goff as they circled the ledge, checking for roosts. "Millions." Millions. It was hard enough to imagine 2 giant bats, much less millions. "There's probably not much in the sky you're afraid of," Shade said enviously. "Nothing," Goff told him. "The vulture and hawk are the only birds of any strength, but they don't dare attack us." Shade wondered what it would be like not to be afraid. He'd never know. He was a runt. Practically everything in the sky was bigger than him. But if he could convince Goth and Throbb to join them, maybe that would count for something. He'd agonized over how to ask them and given up the whole idea more than once. What did he know? Who was he to ask these giant bats to join their fight? Maybe he should leave it all to Frida or the other elders. Marina found a tunnel in the stone face, big enough for Goth and Throbb to fit through. Inside, it was dry and protected from the wind, and small enough so their body heat would quickly warm it up. Shade scanned the floor intently. "What are you doing?" Goff asked. "Checking for our pellets. They make sure they haven't been nesting here." Marina had taught him how to do it. Owls swallow their prey whole, didn't chew, and their pellets contained all the bones and teeth, or whatever they'd eaten. He was afraid one night he'd find a part of a bat's wings, fingers, or a jawbone. This place was clean, however. "You live in constant fear of them, don't you?" Goff said. "We're too small to fight them. But if 5 of you attacked one..." Shade had never thought of that. "Maybe," he said. "We can't allow our bat brothers and sisters to be treated this way," Goff said fiercely, looking at Shade. And at first, Shade thought Goff was angry with him, thinking him a coward. He looked at the floor. "Come with us to the jungle," Goff said. "You and all your colony, and I'll call upon my family for help." "You will?" It was more than Shade could have hoped for. "We can muster an army and return to the north to fight the owls." "You really fight with us?" "It would be a great honor to help you return to the light of day, just like Nocturna promised." "All without the humans' help?" Marina asked. Shade looked at her in surprise. She'd gone almost the whole night without saying a word. He knew she was angry, at Goff, and at him. She was staring at Goff belingeringly. "I wouldn't count on any help from humans," Goff snorted. "They're more interested in imprisoning us than setting us free." Shade felt Marina staring hard at him, but he couldn't meet her gaze. The humans. He just didn't know what to think about them now. They seemed unreliable. Marina thought they were good. Goth and Throbb thought they were evil. As for the bands, there were ones like Frida's, and others that burned bats alive. How could they count on humans? "Maybe Goff's right," he said, still avoiding Marina's eyes. "Maybe the humans aren't going to help us." "What do you know?" she snapped bitterly. "You aren't even banded." Shade looked at her, stung. "Maybe I'm not, but..." "No, you don't know what it is like. How it felt. It was special. I don't care what any of you say. It means something." She paused. "And your father thought so too, Shade." He was aware of Goth, watching him intently. "I know what my father thought," he said coldly. "Maybe he was wrong." "So you're just going to give up on him? Go off to the jungle without looking for him?" "Of course I'll look for him." "So it's just me you're giving up on." Before he could even fumble for words, she flew out from the stone hollow into the night. "Marina!" he shouted, and was about to dart after her, but Goff spread one of his massive wings. "Don't worry. She'll be back. Let her calm down. I didn't want to hurt her feelings." "You didn't. She's put too much hope on these bands. Now she feels angry and foolish. She'll get over it." "Yeah," said Shade, looking after her. He should have felt deliriously happy, knowing that Goth and Throbb were going to help him form an army. but he felt a dead weight of disappointment in his stomach. "We know the stars well enough by now," Throbb said. "What use are the bats? Let's eat them." "Keep your voice down," Goth hissed, looking across the treetops to where Shade foraged alone for insects. He turned back to Throbb. "You'll do as I say, when I say. Without me, you'd still be back in that prison, eating those watery little mice. Remember that." He hadn't told Throbb about his plan, and he wouldn't. Everything had become so clear to him once he'd managed to unlock the dream's meaning. He would travel with Shade and Marina until they met the Silverwings. Then he would convince them to come to the jungle, think they would raise an army. But once they reached his homeland, all the Silverwings would become slaves to his family. Year after year they would breed, creating an endless supply of living bat flesh for them to devour. They would become eternal sacrificial offerings to Zots, who had sent his servant Goth to the north to prove himself and bring their Silverwings to the jungle. Shade hadn't suspected his purpose. It had been so easy. The Silverwing was spirited, yes, and intelligent, but he was also desperate for glory, as if he could ever have it, the scrawny little thing. But Marina? He was more worried about her. She doubted them, he could tell. It seemed like Shade was safely on his side now, but he wondered how loyal he would be to his Brightwing companion. He couldn't afford to lose Shade, and if she should sway him... He turned to Throbb. "You want bats so badly? Find the Brightwing and kill her." "Marina!" Shade was getting worried now. He'd fed alone for half an hour, and still she hadn't come back. She shouldn't be off alone, not now of all times. There might be owl sentries nearby. A clutch of crows. He flew past the stone ledge where they'd found a roost. He hadn't seen Goth or Throbb either. Panic fluttered through him. Had a squadron of owls struck without him knowing? Taken all of them? He wanted to shout out, but knew that would only mark him if there were owls nearby. He began a wide circle around the roost, staying high enough above the trees, but peering down into them with his echo vision. He finished his first circle and started again, wider. In the branches of an oak he spotted Throbb, hunched over, his back to him. With relief he flew down closer and could hear the raw, sticky sounds of feeding, of things being wrenched and chewed. Splayed to one side of Throbb's shoulders and head, he could make out the outline of a lifeless wing. His usual revulsion suddenly gave way to horror. His echo vision flared at the edges, and he was seized with a terrible weakness, afraid he might faint. There were no feathers on that wing. It was fringed with a bright fur, leathery, with the ridges of long fingers beneath the surface. Throbb was eating a Brightwing bat.